So they just went around them, huh? Just bypassed the whole army. Yeah, well, it's not a bad idea, actually, since, I mean, they're stuck on a jungle island with no one to fight, right? Hey, how will they be supplied? Huh? Exactly. Exactly. Got it. Okay, see ya. August 20th, 1943. This week sees some new developments behind diplomatic closed doors, for Sicily has fallen to the Allies and Italy has sent out peace feelers. So the Allied command meets up and decides that they should invade Italy. And now a word from our sponsors.
More taste, smoother on the throat. Better smoke. Join the Time Ghost Army.
I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, the Germans and Italians began evacuating Sicily. The Soviet advance continued, threatening both Kharkov and Poltava, and Winston Churchill arrived in North America for a secret conference with Franklin Roosevelt and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Last week was fairly quiet for a change in the Solomon Islands, but that changes this week. In fact, it changes at dawn the 15th with Allied landings on Vella La Vella, northwest of Munda, bypassing the heavy Japanese defenses on Kolombangara Island. The landings are unopposed. There are only like 250 Japanese on the island. Several waves of enemy planes harassed the invaders during the day, killing 12, but the Americans land some 6,000 men here, and this unhinges the Japanese defense of the central Solomon Islands. See, this leapfrogging takes the Japanese command at Rabaul completely by surprise, and Minoru Sasaki is now isolated on Kolombangara. A counteroffensive is ordered as soon as possible, but the Americans are established so quickly it is called off. Still, it's taken 7 weeks for the Americans to advance 320 kilometers up the Solomons. But the Japanese need to maintain contact with Kolombangara, right? So on the 17th, 4 destroyers set out from Rabaul escorting 22 smaller ships from Buin. They are heading to establish a base at Horainu on the northeast of Vella La Vella, but they are spotted by Allied recon. 4 destroyers are sent out to intercept them. They do meet and exchange both gunfire and torpedoes in the night, and the transport ships are scattered, but only 1 is destroyed, and over the next 24 hours, the rest all reach Horainu. There is no major combat on the island this week, though, and both sides will continue consolidating for the near future. There is action finishing up on another island this week in the Mediterranean. The race for Messina is underway as the week begins. Both British Commander Bernard Montgomery and American Commander George Patton are rushing to reach it first, even as the enemy is melting away across the Straits of Messina and making for Calabria. A rearguard from the Herman Goering Panzer Division holds back the British the night of the 15th, blowing the bridge over a deep ravine. On the 16th, American troops reach the outskirts of Messina, and that night and the next morning, Patton's troops enter Messina a few hours ahead of the British. Patton himself enters the city just after 10 a.m. the 17th. And after the surrender ceremony, J.C. Curry's Sherman tanks of the British 4th Armored arrive. Curry shakes Patton's hand and reportedly says, "'Twas a jolly good race. I congratulate you." So by the 17th, all of Sicily is occupied now by the Allies after 38 days of fighting. The real disappointment for the victors is the amount of Axis troops evacuated, 40,000 German troops and over 60,000 Italians, and loads of tanks and artillery, as I said last week. On the other hand, the Germans have lost 10,000 killed or captured, the Italians some 100,000 POWs, and the Allies have taken only around 7,000 killed and another 15,000 wounded. Although the campaign has been a political success inasmuch as Mussolini has been brought down, the escape of so many Germans makes the campaign in Italy a daunting prospect. Critics have suggested that the Allies could have made more imaginative use of their sea power, not only around the island, but in attacks on the Italian mainland. It has been suggested also that the Allies would have done better to follow up their success on Sicily with an immediate move to the Italian mainland. Although this is a plausible idea, it does not take account of the wider strategic debate between the British and Americans. On the 19th, the Italians have approached the Allies to negotiate a surrender. General Castellano is the leading Italian rep. This happens in Lisbon with Sir Samuel Hoare, the British ambassador. Dwight Eisenhower's Chief of Staff, Walter Bedell Smith, and his Chief of Staff, Kenneth Strong, arrive to continue talks. More on what this means in a minute. For those are not the only talks the Allied leadership is having this week. The Quadrant Conference gets going the 14th at Chateau Frontenac, the huge hotel overlooking the St. Lawrence River in Quebec. There is some real contention straight off the bat. American Army Chief of Staff George Marshall rejects the British ideas about invading Italy and demands a hard and fast date for invading France. See, his gang wants to stage a simultaneous invasion of southern France together with the cross-channel invasion. This provokes 3 days of arguments, with the British claiming that committing to Operation Overlord, the cross-channel invasion, does not preclude knocking Italy out of the war. American Naval Chief Ernest King says he is not going to send another landing craft to the Mediterranean at the expense of Pacific operations. And since he controls over 90% of the landing craft available, he kind of gets to say which amphibious assaults take priority. On the 17th, however, Pietro Badoglio's government in Rome, which was set up following the fall of Mussolini a few weeks ago, puts out some peace feelers, which I just mentioned. There has been some secret contact for several weeks about a possible armistice, but this really now changes things. For now, did the US Joint Chiefs soften their attitude towards the British strategy for occupying Italy before 1 million Germans crossed the Alps? So they're now on board with invading Italy, but only if the main objective is still Overlord. And then the British have to be nailed down to launching that operation before the discussions turn to the war against Japan. This is also extremely heated. See, since the German U-boats were withdrawn from the Atlantic, King has been pulling American warships away to the Pacific for an offensive later this year. And he is accused of actually hoarding landing craft. Tempers flare, and I love this next quote. This had become such a bone of contention by August 19th that when shots rang out, the staff officers who had been sent to wait outside the conference room jumped up in alarm at the prospect of their chiefs shooting out their differences. It proved to be Admiral Mountbatten, proving with his revolver the toughness of pykrete, sawdust-bonded ice which its inventor claimed would make practical huge floating airfields in the Atlantic. Geoffrey Pike, inventor of pykrete, is one of my favorite characters from the first half of the 20th century, and one of Spartacus's too, right, Sparty?
Absolutely.
There you have it. And we have a newsflash about Pike and his inventions either coming out in a few days or it has already just come out, so check that out. Also, on the 19th, Roosevelt and Churchill signed the Quebec Agreement. As I talked about last week when I went over its stipulations, this is to merge the British Tube Alloys Project and American Manhattan Project and fully collaborate in a joint effort to develop nuclear energy and weapons. There is more that is discussed at the conference in both open and closed sessions about Japan, about Burma, and that I will cover next week. There is no dispute over the Pacific Island strategy, though. In fact, the combined chiefs are pretty cool with Chester Nimitz's plans for hitting the Japanese outer defensive perimeter, first at the Gilbert Islands, and then after that the Marshalls and Carolines. The Gilberts are in bombing range of American planes from the Ellis Islands bases. There is some real Allied Air Force action this week in that theater, though. Well, all month, American and Australian planes have been flying from the Trobriands across the Bismarck Sea and attacking the Japanese barges ferrying men into Lai and Salamaua. They sink like 150 of them, so not only is the garrison at Lai reduced so the Japanese can send men overland to Salamaua, they brought in 200 planes to their Wewak base a few hundred kilometers to the north. On the 17th, George Kenney launches a huge surprise 5th Air Force raid against those planes, catching them on the ground. This is known afterwards to many Japanese as the Black Day, for their air power in New Guinea is virtually wiped out at a single stroke. This is interesting because in Europe, this is very much the Black Day for Allied planes. It is the 1-year anniversary of the first 8th Air Force daytime raid, and with it comes the Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission. Mission 84, is a double strike mission that hits 2 separate targets so as to mess with the enemy's fighter reaction and disperse it. It is the first American shuttle bombing raid of the war. We've seen these before. The planes do not return to home base after bombing, but fly to a different field, and then will bomb other targets later before heading home again. 376 B-17 bombers in 16 groups hit German heavy industry. Thing is, they are well beyond the range of their escorting fighters. So despite doing heavy damage, they lose 60 of their number, and well over 50 more are seriously damaged. Many of those end up stranded in North Africa, where they fly to after the raid, and are never repaired. 60 B-17s is a major loss. So this is unquestionably a German victory. They do wreck all 6 Messerschmitt workshops in Regensburg and a bunch of factories in Schweinfurt. Albert Speer reports a 34% loss in production, which sounds like a lot, but shortfalls are made up right away by surpluses elsewhere. Had the Allies followed this up with another raid right away, they may have done a lot more damage, but the losses of the day prevent that from happening. Thing is, the scale of this raid, at its distance from home, really shocked German command, especially combined with Operation Hydra, a British raid on Peenemünde, also on the 17th. In fact, Luftwaffe Chief of Staff Hans Jeschonek, who's been in the doghouse with Hitler after both the failure in North Africa and at Kursk, is under so much stress now with this obvious failure to defend the Reich that he commits suicide the next morning. Günther Korten replaces him as Chief of the Luftwaffe General Staff. The raid does illustrate painfully the dangers of flying over enemy territory without an escort, however. 1st Bomber Wing is over German-controlled territory for 3.5 hours total, but 2 hours and 10 minutes of that, including all the time over Germany itself, has no fighter support at all. Hence the heavy losses. I mentioned Operation Hydra. Operation Crossbow begins with Operation Hydra. Crossbow is a general operation against German long-range weapon systems. The past few months, Allied recon and intelligence has been convincing enough for the War Cabinet Defense Committee to direct Hydra to now attack the V2 rocket site at Peenemünde. I've talked about the V weapons before. They are planned to be used for the long-range strategic bombing of Britain. This raid takes place during the full moon for some light, and the bombers come in at 2,400 meters, which is lower than half the height they usually fly in. The main objective is actually the workers' quarters. They want to kill as many people involved with the project as possible. The weapons themselves and the facility are secondary targets. A secondary full operation called Whitebait sends a group of mosquitoes to Berlin as if they were operating a big raid there. This is to draw off enemy fighters from Peenemünde. 596 British planes are sent in 3 waves. A spotting error in the first wave leads to the Trassenheide slave labor camp being bombed by accident by a third of the planes and killing over 500 people. After correction, they do manage to destroy a lot of the actual target buildings and kill 170 Germans out of 4,000, though they do kill both the chief engineer of the factory and the chief engineer of the rocket motors. The other 2 waves against the V2 works and the experimental works have a lot of targeting issues and are less effective, especially since German fighters begin arriving after being decoyed to Berlin. The British lose 40 planes in the attacks, most of those in the 3rd wave. It is a British victory, but not a huge one. Different accounts say that the German air offense is delayed by 4 to 8 weeks, though it's pretty unsure exactly. They will transfer production to the Harz Mountains, which has to take at least some time, though research and development is not stopped at all. The Germans are just finished up moving in the Soviet Union. By the 16th, the German withdrawal to the Haagensteung is complete, and the Soviets have failed to outflank them. It has been, however, extremely costly for both sides. The Germans have taken nearly 90,000 casualties, and the Red Army some 112,000 killed, but another 300,000 wounded. Soviet Central Front Commander Konstantin Rokossovsky says, "Instead of encircling the enemy, we only pushed them out of the bulge. the operation would have been different if we had used our force for 2 heavy punches which met at Bryansk. Maybe so, but it has given the Soviets the strategic initiative, though the Germans are at least counterattacking this week. Herman Holt's 4th Panzer Army attack against the Soviet 27th and 6th Guards armies goes off on the 17th. They want to encircle the enemy, and this they do, though they are too weak to actually destroy him, just to cause some heavy damage. On Holt's right wing, SS divisions are fighting the Soviet 1st Tank Army and 5th Guards Tank Army early in the week, stopping their advance. It is on the 16th and 17th that 1st Tank is pushed back to the Merchik River, which stabilizes the line since the Soviets here have lost their offensive power. All of this fighting around Kharkov may be preventing the Soviets from surrounding it, but the Germans are running out of ammunition here, and their infantry is being seriously ground down. So on the 18th, echoing what his predecessor Werner Kempf said last week, Army Detachment Commander Otto Wöhler requests to withdraw. If the Germans were to have enough forces to conduct an orderly retreat to the Dnieper River, they could not afford to lose major forces defending a doomed city. Hitler finally saw the necessity for retreat, although he asked Wöhler to delay the action to minimize the political impact on Germany's remaining allies. Okay, the request to evacuate the city is not actually granted until tomorrow, but still. However, the SS divisions attack again the 18th and make good headway, though at the end of the week, the fighting is again inconclusive. There are also local attacks further south this week by the Southwestern Front on the Mius and the Donets rivers the 18th, and by the Southern Front the 19th, who advanced 10 kilometers and cut the railway southeast from Stalino. And up further to the north, the Western Front offensive that began last week continues, but as Robert Forchik writes in Smolensk 1943, it was apparent the Western Front was rapidly approaching the culmination point. In military terminology, the point where the offense is no longer stronger than the defense. There are also rains from the 15th to the 20th, and the supply situation is a disaster. At the end of the week, Stavka reluctantly agrees to suspend operations for a week. The Luftwaffe has really dominated the skies here, even though outnumbered, and that has helped the Germans a lot. They've taken like 28,000 casualties here the past couple weeks, and the Soviets around 3 times that. But in the skies, it's 300 planes for the Soviets lost, and just 50 for the Germans. And here are a couple of notes to end the week. On the 15th, the Americans and Canadians invade Kiska Island in the Aleutians, which the Japanese occupied last year. 34,000 US and Canadian troops, 3 battleships, and dozens of tank transport ships. Nobody's home. The Japanese vacated the premises many weeks ago. On the 17th, Portugal allows the Allies to use the Azores for bases. So the week ends with gunplay at the Quebec conference, Axis plans to evacuate Kharkov, peace talks beginning in Portugal, Sicily occupied, and the Japanese stranded in the Central Solomons. It really is a world war. And secret weapons being developed all over. Rockets in Peenemünde, Pykrete in Britain, and some form of atomic weapon being worked on jointly by the British and Americans in the US henceforth. And huge air raids in Europe and New Guinea, showing how far aviation has advanced in just months. They say necessity is the mother of invention. Well, just looking around this week, it seems war is the mother of necessity. War is also the mother of this channel, if you think about it. And the Time Ghost Army is the rest of the family, providing for us so we can continue this week-by-week coverage until it all ends, whenever that may be. You can join this adventure at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. That's what makes it happen. These are our newest commissioned officers, and our Army member of the week is Stefan Bach. If you'd like to see more about the threat of atomic weapons, here's the playlist for our day-by-day coverage of the Cuba crisis. Do not forget to subscribe, and guess what? I'll see you next time.